Zara's crystalline eyes widened as she watched the human colony ship descend through the orange clouds of Kepler 442b. The massive vessel, scarred from its long journey across the void, settled onto the designated landing pad with surprising grace for something so enormous. Steam hissed from its cooling systems as the engines finally fell silent after years of interstellar travel. The young Valari observer clutched her data tablet closer to her chest, her pale blue skin shimmering with nervous energy. As part of the Galactic Council's xenobiology research team, she had been assigned to study these mysterious humans who called themselves the last survivors of their dying homeworld. Earth, they called it, a planet that had become uninhabitable due to their own reckless expansion. The Valari had read the reports. Humans were classified as a Class 3 species, barely above the primitive threshold for space travel. They were known for their aggressive tendencies, short lifespans, and remarkable ability to destroy their own environments. Most council members viewed them with a mixture of pity and concern. What kind of species would poison their own world and then flee to the stars? Zara adjusted her environmental suit as she approached the landing zone. The air on Kepler 442b was breathable for most oxygen-breathing species, but the gravity was 30% higher than her homeworld, making each step feel heavy and deliberate. Around her, other council observers maintained their distance, watching the proceedings through long-range scanners and surveillance drones. The cargo bay doors of the human ship groaned open, revealing a long ramp that extended to the planet's surface. Zara expected to see soldiers or diplomats emerge first, as was customary with most species during first contact protocols. Instead, a lone figure walked down the ramp wearing simple work clothes and carrying what appeared to be a basic toolkit. The human was tall by galactic standards, though average for his species. His brown hair was streaked with gray, and lines around his eyes suggested he had lived through considerable hardship. What struck Zara most was his relaxed posture. There was no military bearing, no ceremonial dress, no signs of the aggression that human reputation suggested. Behind him, more humans began to emerge, families carrying children, elderly individuals moving slowly but with determination, groups of workers discussing logistics in calm tones. These didn't look like the dangerous warmongers described in the council files. They looked tired, hopeful, and surprisingly organized for refugees. Dr. Kewen Thorne, the lead xenobiologist from the Council Research Station, approached Zara with his usual mixture of scientific curiosity and barely concealed disdain. His insectoid features clicked with disapproval as he observed the human landing party. "Look at them," he buzzed through his translator. "No proper decontamination procedures, no environmental assessments, no territorial negotiations. They simply assume they can settle wherever they choose." Zara nodded politely, but she found herself focusing on something else entirely. The humans moved with purpose, but also with remarkable care for one another. She watched as younger individuals helped the elderly down the ramp, as families stayed close together, as workers immediately began organizing supplies and shelter materials. The first human to reach the bottom of the ramp stopped and looked around at the landscape before them. Kepler 442b was a beautiful world, with vast purple grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, twin suns casting everything in a warm, golden light. But it was also a dangerous world, home to numerous predator species that made it unsuitable for most council races. That was why the humans had been directed here. The council had assumed that a species destructive enough to poison their own world would either adapt to the dangers or eliminate themselves trying. It was considered a practical solution to what many viewed as an inevitable problem. The human leader, who had introduced himself via communication as Captain Marcus Chen, began directing the unloading of supplies. Zara watched with growing fascination as the humans worked. They didn't use the advanced automated systems that most spacefaring species relied upon. Instead, they formed efficient chains of workers, passing cargo from hand to hand, organizing materials with quick verbal coordination. Primitives, Dr. Thorne clicked dismissively. They're barely beyond manual labor. How they managed interstellar travel is beyond my comprehension. But Zara noticed something the senior scientist missed. The humans weren't just moving cargo randomly. They were establishing a perimeter, positioning supplies strategically, and several individuals had already begun scanning the surrounding area with handheld devices. This wasn't primitive confusion. This was organized preparation. As the day progressed, the human settlement took shape with surprising speed. Temporary shelters were erected in a defensive pattern that maximized security while maintaining efficient movement between structures. Gardens were marked out near water sources, and communication arrays were positioned for optimal planetary coverage. More importantly, Zara observed the humans constantly scanning their environment. Unlike most council species, who relied heavily on their technology for threat assessment, the humans seemed to use all of their senses. They listened to sounds, examined tracks in the soil, and even tasted the air to gather information about their new home. "They're remarkably adaptable," Zara murmured into a recording device. "Initial observations suggest humans possess enhanced situational awareness compared to standard baseline species. They appear to gather environmental data through multiple sensory channels simultaneously." Dr. Thorne's antennae twitched with irritation. "Don't romanticize their primitive behavior, research assistant Zara. They're simply too underdeveloped to rely properly on technology. It's a limitation, not an advantage." As evening approached on Kepler 442b, the twin suns began to set, casting long shadows across the purple grasslands. This was when the planet's predators became active, and when the real test of human survival would begin. The Council observers retreated to their fortified research station, protected by energy barriers and automated defense systems. The humans, however, remained in their temporary settlement, using nothing more than basic sensors and what appeared to be carefully organized watch rotations. Zara convinced Dr. Thorne to allow her to monitor the human settlement through the night using long-range scanners. She was curious to see how the refugees would handle their first encounter with Kepler 442b's dangerous wildlife. She didn't have to wait long. The shadow maw emerged from the tree line just after full darkness fell. It was a massive predator, nearly 4 meters long and built like a cross between a large feline and a reptile. Its 6 legs moved with deadly silence, and its electromagnetic camouflage made it nearly invisible to most scanning equipment. The creature was known to hunt in packs and had been responsible for the failure of 3 previous settlement attempts on this world. Zara watched her scanners in fascination and growing alarm. The shadow maw was approaching the human perimeter, and based on council records, the humans had no chance of detecting it until it was already among their shelters. But then something unexpected happened. One of the humans on watch duty, a woman with short gray hair, suddenly turned toward the exact location where the shadow maw was approaching. She raised her hand and made a series of quick gestures to other guards positioned around the settlement. The humans began moving with quiet efficiency, but they weren't preparing weapons or activating shields. Instead, they seemed to be organizing some kind of coordinated response that Zara couldn't interpret. The woman on watch duty walked slowly toward the hidden shadow maw, her hands empty and her posture relaxed. Dr. Thorne's scanners would have registered this as either suicidal behavior or complete ignorance of the danger. But Zara noticed something else. The woman was making soft sounds, almost musical in nature. Not words, but a kind of rhythmic humming that seemed to carry across the settlement. The shadow maw stopped its approach. Zara checked her scanners frantically, convinced there must be some technical malfunction. According to all council research, shadow maws were apex predators with no fear of humanoid species. They attacked without warning and showed no signs of higher intelligence or social behavior. The human woman continued her soft humming as she slowly sat down on the ground, about 20 meters from where the invisible predator waited in the grass. She reached into a small pouch at her side and removed what appeared to be food rations, which she placed on the ground in front of her. Then she simply waited. For nearly an hour, the woman sat motionless while the shadow maw remained hidden in the grass. Other humans maintained their positions around the settlement, but none of them showed signs of fear or aggression. They simply continued their normal activities while staying alert. Finally, the shadow maw's camouflage flickered and failed, revealing the massive predator crouched in the purple grass. Its 6 yellow eyes focused on the human woman, who continued her soft humming without showing any sign of fear. The predator took one cautious step forward, then another. Its massive head swiveled as it scanned the settlement, clearly aware that other humans were watching, but receiving no threatening signals from any of them. Slowly, carefully, the shadow maw approached the woman and the food she had placed on the ground. Zara's hands shook as she recorded the unprecedented event. In all of Council history, no one had ever documented a peaceful interaction between a sentient species and a shadow maw. These creatures were considered irredeemably hostile, suitable only for extermination or avoidance. The shadow maw sniffed the offered food cautiously, then looked directly at the human woman. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the two species regarded each other across the vast gulf of evolution and experience. Then the predator lowered its massive head and carefully took the offered food. Dr. Thorne burst into the observation room just as the shadow maw was retreating back toward the tree line, moving with the same silent grace it had used to approach. "What happened?" he demanded, his insectoid features clicking with agitation. "Our perimeter alarms detected a large predator near the human settlement. Why haven't they activated distress signals?" Zara turned to face her superior, her mind racing to process what she had just witnessed. The humans hadn't just survived an encounter with one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. They had somehow transformed it from a deadly threat into something approaching a peaceful interaction. "Dr. Thorne," she said slowly, "I think we may have seriously underestimated these humans." The senior scientist's antennae twitched with dismissive irritation. "Nonsense. They probably used some kind of chemical deterrent or sonic weapon. Primitive species often develop crude defensive mechanisms." But Zara knew what she had seen. The human woman had used no weapons, no technology, no chemical deterrents. She had relied on something far more sophisticated than any of those options. She had used understanding. As the night continued, Zara maintained her watch over the human settlement. The shadow maw didn't return, but other predators did approach the perimeter. Each time, the humans responded with the same calm confidence, the same patient observation, the same willingness to attempt communication before resorting to conflict. By morning, word had spread throughout the Council research station that the human refugees had survived their first night on Kepler 442b without losing a single individual. More remarkably, they had done so without firing a single weapon or activating any defensive systems. Zara compiled her observations into a preliminary report, but she knew that Dr. Thorne and the other senior researchers would dismiss her findings as the naive observations of an inexperienced xenobiologist. The idea that humans might possess unique capabilities for interspecies communication was too far outside accepted scientific understanding. But as she watched the humans begin their second day on their new world, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that the Galactic Council had made a serious error in judgment. These weren't primitive refugees fleeing a world they had destroyed through carelessness. These were survivors of a world that had tested them beyond the limits that most species could endure. They had learned to adapt, to understand, and to find solutions that went far beyond simple technology or force. The woman who had faced the Shadow Maw was now working alongside other humans to establish what appeared to be a more permanent settlement. She moved with quiet confidence, occasionally pausing to examine tracks in the soil or listen to sounds from the nearby forest. Her name, Zara learned from intercepted communications, was Sarah Chen, the captain's sister and a former animal behaviorist from Earth. According to the fragmentary records the humans had shared with the Council, she had spent her career studying the relationship between humans and other species on their dying world. As Zara prepared her formal report on the humans' first night, she realized that the Galactic Council's understanding of human civilization might be fundamentally flawed. The destruction of Earth might not have been the result of primitive aggression or careless expansion. It might have been the result of a species that cared too much, that tried too hard to coexist with other life forms, that refused to abandon their world until the very last moment when continuation of life became impossible. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. If humans could establish peaceful contact with Shadow Maws within hours of arriving on an alien world, what other capabilities might they possess that the Council had failed to recognize? Zara looked out at the growing human settlement and realized that her assignment to study these refugees had just become far more complex than anyone had anticipated. 3 weeks had passed since the human settlement had been established on Kepler 442b, and Zara found herself spending more time observing them than any other research subject in her career. What had begun as a routine xenobiological study had evolved into something that challenged everything she thought she knew about interspecies relations and predator behavior. The humans had not only survived on one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds, they were thriving. Their settlement had expanded from temporary shelters to permanent structures, and they had established what appeared to be a sustainable relationship with the local ecosystem that defied all Council understanding of predator dynamics. Dr. Thorne had become increasingly frustrated with Zara's reports, dismissing her observations as misinterpretation of primitive survival tactics. But Zara knew what she was seeing, and it was far from primitive. The Shadow Maw that had approached the settlement on the first night had returned every evening since then. The massive predator, which the humans had begun calling Shade, now arrived at sunset and accepted food offerings from Sarah Chen before retreating to the forest. More remarkably, Shade had been joined by 2 other Shadow Maws, apparently its packmates. Council xenobiology had always maintained that Shadow Maws were solitary hunters with no pack behavior. Yet here were 3 of them, working together and displaying what could only be described as social intelligence. Zara had requested permission to conduct closer observations, but Dr. Thorne had refused, citing safety protocols. The Council research station remained sealed behind its energy barriers, monitoring the humans from a distance of several kilometers. On this particular morning, Zara watched through her long-range scanners as Sarah Chen emerged from the settlement and walked toward the forest edge. This had become part of the humans' daily routine, though Zara had never been able to determine exactly what Sarah was doing during these solitary walks. Today, however, something was different. Shade materialized from the forest shadows, its electromagnetic camouflage flickering as it approached the human woman. But instead of the cautious approach Zara had observed during feeding times, the Shadow Maw moved with what appeared to be urgency. The massive predator approached Sarah and made a series of low, rumbling sounds, its 6 legs shifting restlessly. Sarah responded by placing her hand gently on the creature's armored head, listening to its vocalizations with obvious concentration. Then, to Zara's amazement, Sarah began following Shade into the forest. Zara immediately activated her mobile scanner array and requested permission to pursue the human researcher. Dr. Thorne denied the request, but Zara made a decision that would change the course of her career. She overrode the safety protocols and left the research station. The forest of Kepler 442b was unlike anything in Zara's experience. Ancient trees stretched toward the sky, their purple bark and silver leaves creating a canopy that filtered the twin suns into shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air was thick with the scents of alien flowers and the subtle electromagnetic signatures of the planet's unique ecosystem. Zara's environmental suit tracked Sarah's biosignature deeper into the forest, but she was careful to maintain distance. If the human was in danger, Zara wanted to document what happened. If Sarah was somehow communicating with the Shadow Maw, Zara needed to understand how. The trail led to a clearing where Zara discovered something that would revolutionize Council understanding of Kepler 442b's ecosystem. In the center of the clearing lay another Shadow Maw, but this one was clearly injured. A massive wound along its side suggested an encounter with one of the planet's even more dangerous predators, possibly a ridge stalker. Shade had led Sarah to its injured packmate. What happened next challenged every assumption about both human and Shadow Maw behavior that existed in Council scientific literature. Sarah approached the wounded creature slowly, making soft sounds similar to the humming she used during feeding times. The injured Shadow Maw raised its massive head and regarded her with obvious pain and wariness. But it didn't flee or attempt to attack. Sarah knelt beside the creature and began examining its wounds with gentle, practiced movements. She spoke continuously in low, soothing tones, occasionally touching the Shadow Maw's armored hide in what appeared to be a reassuring gesture. From her hiding position, Zara recorded every moment of the unprecedented interspecies medical consultation. Sarah was clearly assessing the creature's injuries, and the Shadow Maw was allowing her to do so with a level of trust that should have been impossible. After several minutes, Sarah stood and spoke to Shade, who had remained nearby during the examination. The human gestured toward the settlement, then toward the injured Shadow Maw, then back to herself. She was clearly trying to communicate something complex to the predator. Shade responded with a series of rumbling vocalizations and electromagnetic pulses that Zara's scanners detected as a form of structured communication. The Shadow Maw wasn't just making random sounds. It was speaking. Sarah nodded as if she understood, then began the journey back toward the human settlement. But instead of following the path they had taken into the forest, she moved in a direct line toward the settlement, with Shade keeping pace beside her. Zara realized that Sarah was going to bring medical supplies back to treat the injured Shadow Maw. A human was going to provide veterinary care to one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators in the middle of an alien forest based on a request from another predator that she somehow understood. The implications were staggering. Zara followed at a distance as Sarah reached the settlement and began gathering medical supplies. Other humans asked questions, but Sarah's explanations were brief and focused. Within minutes, she had assembled a portable medical kit and was heading back into the forest. This time, she wasn't alone. Captain Marcus Chen and 2 other humans accompanied her, along with Shade and another Shadow Maw that had apparently joined the group while Zara was observing the settlement. The rescue party moved through the forest with efficiency that suggested they had planned for exactly this kind of situation. The humans carried medical equipment while the Shadow Maws provided reconnaissance and navigation. It was a coordinated effort between 2 species that, according to all Council knowledge, should have been trying to kill each other. Back in the clearing, Sarah began treating the injured Shadow Maw with the same calm competence she had shown during the initial examination. She cleaned the wounds, applied antiseptic compounds, and used medical synthesis equipment to create bandaging appropriate for the creature's unique physiology. Throughout the process, the injured Shadow Maw remained calm and cooperative. More remarkably, it seemed to understand that Sarah was helping it. The creature's electromagnetic field, which Zara's scanners read as indicating stress and pain, gradually shifted to patterns associated with relaxation and trust. Captain Chen and the other humans maintained a perimeter around the clearing, but they weren't watching for threats. They were watching for other shadow maws, and when several more arrived, the humans greeted them with the same calm confidence they showed toward Shade. Zara counted 6 shadow maws in total, all gathered around the clearing while a human provided medical care to one of their pack members. According to Council Xenobiology, this situation should have resulted in immediate human casualties. Instead, it looked like an interspecies medical conference. Sarah completed her treatment of the injured shadow maw and stepped back to assess her work. The creature's wounds were properly cleaned and bandaged, and she had administered pain medication synthesized specifically for its biology. She had provided better medical care than most council species would have received on frontier worlds. But what happened next surprised even Zara, who had grown accustomed to humans defying scientific expectations. The injured shadow maw struggled to its feet, moving carefully to avoid disturbing its bandages. It approached Sarah slowly, lowered its massive head, and made a soft rumbling sound that Zara's scanners identified as completely unlike any previously recorded shadow maw vocalization. The creature was saying thank you. Sarah reached out and touched the shadow maw's head gently, responding with her own soft humming. The exchange lasted only a moment, but Zara realized she was witnessing the establishment of a relationship that went far beyond simple feeding arrangements or territorial agreements. The humans had somehow achieved true communication with a species that the Galactic Council had classified as non-intelligent predators. As the group prepared to leave the clearing, Shade approached Captain Chen and made a series of complex vocalizations accompanied by electromagnetic pulses that Zara's equipment barely detected. The human captain listened carefully, occasionally asking what sounded like clarifying questions in response to the creature's communications. When Shade finished speaking, Captain Chen turned to his sister with an expression of concern. "Sarah, Shade says there are ridge stalkers moving toward our settlement. A pack of at least 4, maybe more. They'll reach our perimeter sometime tonight." Ridge stalkers were apex predators that made shadow maws look like domesticated pets. They were massive, heavily armored creatures with electromagnetic weapons capable of disrupting most Council technology. 3 previous Council research expeditions had been evacuated from Kepler 442b specifically because of ridge stalker threats. Zara expected the humans to immediately begin evacuation procedures or at least activate emergency protocols to contact the Council research station for assistance. Instead, Captain Chen simply nodded and began discussing defensive strategies with his team. "We'll need to establish overlapping fields of fire around the settlement," he said calmly. "Ridge stalkers are tough, but they're not invulnerable. Sarah, will Shade and the others help?" Sarah spoke to Shade in a mixture of human words and rumbling sounds that seemed to approximate Shadowmaw communication. The massive predator responded with what was clearly an affirmative answer. "They'll help," Sarah confirmed. "Shade says ridge stalkers are enemies to both our species. They're willing to fight alongside us." Zara watched in amazement as humans and Shadowmaws began coordinating their defense of the settlement. The humans positioned weapons and equipment, while the Shadowmaws used their natural camouflage and knowledge of the terrain to establish ambush positions. It was an alliance between species that challenged everything the Galactic Council understood about interspecies relations. Humans weren't just surviving on Kepler 442b. They were transforming it into something that had never existed before. A world where different species worked together instead of simply competing for resources. As evening approached, Zara faced a decision that would define her career as a xenobiologist. She could return to the safety of the Council research station and observe the coming battle from a distance. Or she could stay close enough to document what promised to be either a catastrophic failure or a revolutionary breakthrough in interspecies cooperation. She chose to stay. Hidden in the forest near the human settlement, Zara prepared to record what might be the most important scientific observation in Council history. Humans and Shadow Maws were about to face Ridge Stalkers together as allies rather than competitors. The twin suns set on Kepler 442b, and in the growing darkness, Zara detected the electromagnetic signatures of approaching Ridge Stalkers. 4 massive predators, each capable of destroying a Council research station single-handedly, were moving toward a settlement defended by primitive refugees and creatures that were supposed to be mindless killers. But as Zara watched the coordinated preparations of humans and Shadow Maws, she realized that everything the Council thought it knew about intelligence, cooperation, and survival might be fundamentally wrong. The real test was about to begin. The Ridge Stalkers emerged from the deep forest like living nightmares, their massive forms crackling with bioelectric energy that made Zara's scanners flicker with interference. Each creature stood nearly 6 meters tall and was built like a fortress of muscle and armor, with electromagnetic projectors along their spinal crests that could disable most Council technology at considerable range. Zara crouched behind a fallen tree, her heart racing as she watched 4 of the apex predators approach the human settlement. According to all Council records, Ridge Stalkers were unstoppable killing machines that had eliminated every previous attempt at colonization on Kepler 442b. No defensive strategy had ever proven effective against them, but the humans weren't behaving like previous colonists. Captain Chen had positioned his people in what appeared to be a standard defensive formation around the settlement perimeter. But Zara quickly realized there was nothing standard about their strategy. The humans weren't trying to create an impenetrable barrier. Instead, they had established overlapping fields of observation and communication that allowed them to track the Ridge Stalkers' approach while leaving apparent gaps in their defenses. The gaps were deliberate. Shade and 5 other Shadow Maws had positioned themselves in the forest between the approaching Ridge Stalkers and the human settlement. But they weren't hiding in ambush positions as Zara would have expected. Instead, they were moving in patterns that seemed designed to guide the Ridge Stalkers toward specific approach routes. As the first Ridge Stalker entered the area between the forest and the settlement, Sarah Chen emerged from the human defensive line and walked slowly toward the massive predator. She carried no weapons, wore no armor, and showed no signs of fear as she approached a creature capable of killing her with a single bioelectric discharge. Zara nearly activated her emergency beacon to call for Council intervention, but she forced herself to remain hidden and continue recording. If Sarah was about to die, at least her sacrifice would provide valuable data about Ridge Stalker behavior. The massive predator stopped its advance and focused its attention on the lone human walking toward it. Ridge Stalkers were known to have excellent vision and electromagnetic senses, so it was certainly aware of the defensive positions around the settlement. Yet it seemed genuinely puzzled by Sarah's approach. Sarah began making the same soft humming sounds she used to communicate with the Shadow Maws, but modified in ways that Zara's audio equipment detected as frequency shifts, designed to match the Ridge Stalker's natural electromagnetic signature. She was attempting to communicate with a creature that Council science insisted was incapable of complex thought. The Ridge Stalker tilted its massive head, studying the human with what appeared to be curiosity rather than predatory intent. Its electromagnetic projectors, which should have been charging for an attack, remained dormant. Sarah continued her approach, occasionally pausing to make gentle gestures with her hands. When she was close enough to touch the creature, she stopped and simply stood there, maintaining what could only be described as respectful eye contact with the apex predator. For several minutes, human and Ridge Stalker regarded each other across the vast evolutionary gap that separated their species. The other 3 Ridge Stalkers had stopped their advance as well, apparently waiting to see how their pack leader would respond to this unprecedented situation. Then the ridge stalker did something that Zara would later describe as the most scientifically impossible thing she had ever witnessed. It sat down. The massive predator, capable of destroying vehicles with its bioelectric weapons, lowered itself to the ground in what was clearly a non-threatening posture. Its electromagnetic projectors remained inactive, and its body language shifted from predatory alertness to something approaching relaxation. Sarah responded by sitting down as well, maintaining the same calm eye contact that had characterized their initial interaction. She continued her modified humming, occasionally varying the frequency and pattern in what appeared to be an attempt at conversation. The ridge stalker began responding with low-frequency electromagnetic pulses that Zara's equipment detected as a form of structured communication. Like the shadow maws, the ridge stalker was speaking. From her hiding position in the forest, Zara watched a conversation between species that challenged everything the Galactic Council understood about intelligence, communication, and the nature of consciousness itself. A human refugee was having a peaceful discussion with one of the most dangerous predators in known space. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with both species gradually developing what appeared to be a rudimentary common language based on electromagnetic frequencies and vocal patterns. Other humans remained at their defensive positions, but Zara could see that they had relaxed their readiness postures as the encounter continued without violence. The shadow maws had also emerged from their concealed positions and were approaching the meeting between human and ridge stalker. Zara watched in fascination as shade positioned itself between Sarah and the massive predator, not as protection, but apparently as a translator. The three species began what could only be described as a diplomatic conference. Through her scanners, Zara detected complex exchanges of electromagnetic signals, vocal communications, and body language that suggested sophisticated information sharing. The humans were somehow facilitating communication between shadow maws and ridge stalkers, two species that Council science insisted were mortal enemies. Captain Chen approached the group slowly, speaking in low tones to his sister. Sarah responded with explanations that Zara's audio equipment couldn't fully capture, but the captain's expressions suggested he was receiving intelligence about ridge stalker behavior and motivations. After another hour of interspecies communication, the meeting began to disperse. The ridge stalkers moved back toward the deep forest, but their electromagnetic signatures indicated relaxation rather than retreat. The shadow maws accompanied them partway, continuing their conversation as the groups separated. Sarah returned to the settlement with obvious satisfaction, speaking excitedly to her brother and the other humans about what had transpired. Zara couldn't hear the details from her hiding position, but the humans' body language suggested they had achieved something remarkable. As dawn approached on Kepler 442b, Zara realized she had witnessed the most significant breakthrough in interspecies relations in Galactic Council history. The humans hadn't just survived an encounter with ridge stalkers. They had established peaceful communication and possibly even mutual understanding with creatures that had been considered mindless killing machines. But the full implications of what had happened wouldn't become clear until later that day. Zara returned to the Council research station to find Dr. Thorne in a state of considerable agitation. Long-range scanners had detected the ridge stalker approach and the extended encounter with the human settlement, but the research station's automated systems had been unable to determine what had prevented the expected massacre. "Research Assistant Zara?" Dr. Thorne clicked urgently. "We need to prepare immediate evacuation protocols. The human settlement has somehow survived a ridge stalker attack, but it's only a matter of time before the predators return in greater numbers. We must document what remains of their settlement before withdrawing to a safe distance." Zara hesitated, knowing that her observations contradicted Dr. Thorne's assumptions, but uncertain how to present her findings in a way that would be believed. The idea that humans had established peaceful communication with both shadow maws and ridge stalkers was so far outside accepted scientific understanding that even she had difficulty accepting what she had witnessed. "Dr. Thorne," she said carefully, "I believe the humans may have achieved something more significant than mere survival. My observations suggest they have established communication with the local predator species." The senior scientist's antennae twitched with dismissive irritation. "Nonsense. Shadow maws and ridge stalkers are non-intelligent predators driven purely by instinct. Any apparent communication is simply misinterpretation of threat displays and territorial behavior." But even as Dr. Thorne spoke, the research station's long-range scanners began detecting unprecedented activity around the human settlement. Groups of shadow maws were approaching from multiple directions, but instead of surrounding the settlement for an attack, they appeared to be bringing gifts. Zara watched through the scanners as shadow maws deposited fresh fruits, medicinal plants, and other resources near the human settlement before retreating to respectful distances. The humans emerged to collect these offerings, but more importantly, they reciprocated with gifts of their own: processed foods, medical supplies, and technological items that the shadow maws examined with obvious curiosity. This was trade, interspecies commerce between humans and creatures that the Council had classified as non-intelligent animals. Throughout the day, more species began approaching the human settlement. Small herbivores, flying creatures, even some of the planet's marine species emerged from nearby rivers to participate in what was clearly becoming an interspecies market. The humans had somehow established themselves as facilitators of communication between dozens of species that had never interacted peacefully before. Kepler 442b was transforming from a deadly world of competing predators into a functioning ecosystem based on cooperation and mutual benefit. Dr. Thorne watched the scanner displays with growing confusion and frustration. The data clearly showed unprecedented interspecies cooperation, but it contradicted so many fundamental assumptions about animal behavior that accepting it would require rewriting entire fields of xenobiological science. "There must be some kind of technological manipulation," he insisted. "Perhaps the humans are using pheromone generators or electromagnetic control devices to modify predator behavior." But Zara knew better. She had observed the interactions closely enough to see that the humans were using nothing more sophisticated than patience, observation, and an apparently innate ability to understand and communicate with other species. Over the following weeks, Zara continued her observations while Dr. Thorne struggled to develop theories that would explain human success without challenging Council scientific orthodoxy. The transformation of Kepler 442b continued at an accelerating pace. The human settlement became a hub of interspecies cooperation that defied every principle of evolutionary competition. Shadow maws began bringing injured members of other species to Sarah Chen for medical treatment. Ridge stalkers started providing protection services for smaller creatures in exchange for resources they couldn't obtain themselves. Flying species established communication networks that allowed rapid information sharing across vast distances. Most remarkably, the humans weren't controlling this transformation. They were simply facilitating it by demonstrating that cooperation was possible and beneficial for all participants. 3 months after the initial human landing, Zara submitted her final report to the Galactic Council. The document detailed the most significant breakthrough in interspecies relations in recorded history, supported by extensive sensor data and direct observations. The response from the Council was swift and decisive. Dr. Thorne was reassigned to a different project, and Zara was promoted to lead xenobiologist for the Kepler 442b research station. More importantly, the Council issued new directives for first contact protocols based on the human model of patient observation and communication attempts. But the real revolution wasn't happening in Council chambers. It was happening on Kepler 442b, where a community of dozens of species was developing that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligence, consciousness, and the possibilities for cooperation between different forms of life. Zara often visited the human settlement, which had grown into a small city that accommodated multiple species with remarkable efficiency. Sarah Chen had become something like an ambassador between species, teaching other humans her communication techniques while continuing to develop new methods for interspecies dialogue. The secret, Sarah explained to Zara during one of these visits, isn't thinking of other species as less intelligent or more dangerous. It's recognizing that intelligence takes many different forms, and that every species has something valuable to contribute to a larger community. As Zara looked out over the thriving interspecies city that had grown around the human settlement, she realized that the refugees from Earth hadn't just found a new home on Kepler 442b, they had created something entirely new, proof that the galaxy's different species could work together as partners rather than competitors. The humans had brought more than survival skills and adaptability to their new world. They had brought the revolutionary idea that cooperation was possible, and in doing so, they had changed everything. Watching Shade playfully interact with human children while ridge stalkers provided security for the city's markets, Zara understood that the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had shown that the barriers between species weren't insurmountable natural laws, but simply assumptions that had never been properly challenged. And in challenging those assumptions, they had opened up possibilities that no one had ever imagined before.